Welcome to Baseball and Coffee, episode 51 with Tino and Aaron. What's up, Aaron?
The usual. How are you doing today?
Good. It's cold, but I'm good.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm just sporting the sock cap. I don't have any baseball sock caps, unfortunately.
I was
And
gonna
the
say
Eagles logo should
Eagles,
be the
huh?
'80s Kelly Green
Right?
logo, 'cause that's the Eagles of my heart.
The Randall Cunningham Eagles.
Exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Yeah, if I had a few spare nickels, I would go get something to add the old Eagles logo because I can actually get it now. But
It's
anyway,
yeah, the old that color green was
yeah, that Kelly
pretty
Green. Yeah,
crazy. Yeah, it's awesome.
yeah,
All right, this episode we are going to cover the pitcher free agent signings this offseason, from Edwin Diaz re-signing with the Mets all the way down to Carlos Rodon signing with the New York Yankees. Any coffee stories for us to get started? Anything?
yeah, yeah. Let me turn off my blur here.
Mm-hmm.
So I have another Vermont coffee I was wanting to share.
Sweet. Awesome.
So this one, uh, it's not a super decorative bag. It's
Mm-hmm.
Carrier Coffee.
Mm-hmm.
It's a seasonal blend. So based on the time of year, they changed the coffee. But I also like the way it was very unique the way they have their range on their coffee bag. They have it from bright to deep, which I thought was really
Huh.
interesting. And this one was kind of in the two-thirds towards the deep, but it's a blend. Very tasty, very easy to drink,
Mm-hmm.
kind of graham crackery notes, a little bit of red fruit.
Huh.
Uh, but it's a really nice blend. And again, Carrier Coffee in Vermont. I would definitely get it again. It says milk chocolate citrus, sweet and balanced. I would definitely agree with. So
What's the
really nice.
what's the blend again?
It doesn't say. It says that it's a coffee that they use seasonally
Mm,
fresh coffees in it.
got it.
Um, but yeah, it's called Chit Chat Carrier Coffee. Very good.
Nice. Nice. The Creek Town I'm drinking right now from Walla Walla Roasters is Sumatra, Ethiopia, and Guatemala, and um, it's pretty straightforward. But I guess you would know this better than me because I didn't roast. But the it's so hard to really kind of successfully blend coffee in a way
Mm,
that
hmm.
that's balanced and so while it's not, I wouldn't say it's like an incredibly beautiful cup of coffee. I really appreciate the fact that it is balanced and utilizes those three regions. But that's what I have right now, sitting in this cup here.
Yeah, I don't know when we'll record again, but the next copy I'm going to share is I was gifted a Pete's Holiday Blend,
Oh, fun.
um, and I'm going to try that out when Amelia is home for Christmas. The family and I'm going to share out what that's like because I have
Sweet.
only had one Pete's coffee and it was their fall coffee and it was really good. I think I talked about it when I had it, so I'm
Mhm.
going to share what that's like.
Question for you:
Yeah,
are we going to do one coffee excursion while we're in Arizona? Maybe
like a coffee shop excursion.
Saturday or Sunday morning. I think we owe it to the pod to for
Yeah,
you and I to go grab our, even if it's just grabbing our coffee, that we pick one shop to go to and grab our coffee and report back.
I mean I would take the over on one trip personally.
Well, we're certainly gonna have coffee every day, but just in terms of
Absolutely.
like
No.
going to
Yeah,
the cool shop to go get it.
100%.
Right on.
Yeah. And that's part of, again, I came back from Vermont with like 4 bags of coffee. So that's part of what I do when I go places. So
Absolutely.
I imagine you and I together, I don't see how there'd be any shortage of that.
Right. Uh Baseball. What was your reaction to Carlos Correa and his movement from us thinking he was going to be a West Coaster with the San Francisco Giants to signing with the New York Mets?
I was surprised. But I think I would have been more surprised if it was someone other than the Mets who seemed to be taking, I don't want to say devaluing because I think this is primarily a fantasy discussion and long-term ramifications aren't necessarily relevant for fantasy, but I think they're just approaching future financial viability much differently than anyone else right now.
Mm-hmm.
And they're willing to just spend any opportunity they see to improve. So I made it a little less surprising, but it was still surprising. it's not clear to me who exactly backed out, if it was Giants or there was both ways, or it's Correa. I don't know, but it seems like the medicals is the excuse we're using to get out from under it. But yeah, it's interesting. Interesting what the Mets are doing. I don't think it changes a lot for him fantasy wise, um, at
The
all, really.
the I think that as far as the contracts go and the length and the dollars and the things that the Mets are doing, I think that I forgot who said it, but somebody made a really good argument that they're not, it's almost to their advantage to make the contract longer if the AAV stays lower because um, they're still getting the value that they're getting up front in terms of wins from that wins above replacement from that player is worth a lot more than the AAV that they're paying them in those first couple of years. So if you get, you know, a 6, 7, even 8 win player from Correa for 3 or 4 years, you've already made value the contract valuable to you, right, as an organization. So yes, you're paying it longer, but it's almost as if it's like making a smaller payment on a loan as opposed to having to make the big payments up front. So I don't know. I'm glad the Mariners are taking a different approach. I don't always love that, throw your money around free agent type of approach, but if you're a Mets fan, you've got to be excited. The other interesting part for me was fantasy wise is that Correa is now a third baseman
Right.
and
Yeah.
and he's hitting second. So he's got RBI opportunities because Nimmo's a high OBP guy. And then he's
Yeah.
got Lindor and Alonso behind him. So I think he's in a really good spot to put up great numbers. I like him. So the one knock on Correa, as we've talked about, is his lack of speed, right? I think expecting a lot of hits, a lot of runs, a lot of RBIs, 25 to 30 home runs, those things are all pretty locked in, but in a good offense. But we don't rely on, in both roto and head to head, we don't rely on third base as a position to provide us with stolen bases, right? You've got
Right.
Ramirez and then not a whole lot else as far as steals go. So if now Carlos Correa is a third baseman, right? I think for me, his value shoots up a bit because you're not worried about those steals anymore. If you took a 0 or a 1 steal at short, you're gonna have to make up for it elsewhere. So that for me increases his fantasy value just a bit. And obviously,
I think that's a great call out, because I think, yeah, if you had him, you would play. He's probably going to be third and short eligible for 23,
mm-hmm.
and I think 95% of the teams would play him at third.
Right.
That's a great call out on your part.
So I don't know, I think it's pretty exciting. So last year he ended up with 70 runs, 22 homers, and 64 RBIs, but he was playing in a pretty shitty offense and got not shitty, but not an offense surrounded by Lindor and Alonso. Let's put it that way. And he also started off incredibly slow, but he still ended up with an 834 OPS and a 10% above 10% walk rate. I don't know, he's a great player. I'm excited to see him play. The other interesting thing that I heard yesterday was that he is probably going to make a very similar amount of money with this contract as he would have in San Francisco, given the taxes in
Right.
California. So
Right.
we're talking about him having to take less money, but it's really not, in actuality, less money. As far as like who's responsible for what happened, I kind of don't care, to be honest with you. The only thing that I would care about is if he was to get hurt down the road, which is obviously what the Giants were worried about. But yeah,
Yeah.
should be fun. That lineup should be a lot of fun. They've got a dynamite pitching staff, as we've talked about. I
That
believe.
was the thing that stuck out to me, honestly, I was looking at their lineup in prep for our discussion, and
Uh-huh.
their lineup is actually, to me, not that impressive or deep after the top five or even top four,
Mm-hmm.
even for all the spending that they've done. It's really their pitching that impresses me. Um, Obviously, I have Diaz at top of bringing in Rayleigh and Robertson.
Mm-hmm.
Elias Hernandez is, I think, interesting middle reliever. Seeing him go from starting to, so they're trying to address their bullpen, but obviously the starters are their bread and butter. And
Right.
yeah, it's, I think fantasy wise, you know, it's interesting. We have guys like Francisco Alvarez and Brett Beatty, guys who we think or view as relatively close fantasy wise. And you know, kind of have to fight to see opportunities. They already have a natural DH platoon with lefty Vogelback and right-handed Ruff. And they got Escobar as kind of a utility guy, and then but I think those guys aren't, I think, super talented enough to keep a prospect if they hit well
Mhm.
out of the lineup, right? Because their ceiling is they're just big leaguers, and that's about it.
Right.
But they're also veterans, and they're trying to win now. So, what will their opportunities look like if they don't do well in spring training or do well early? They
Right.
make it in your roster. I think that's fantasy wise, it's something else to think about with the direction the Mets are going for this season.
I do think that uh, I do think Alvarez has a road to 450, 500 plate appearances because I think he'll, even though they have Ruff can also play, if they want to give Nimmo a day off against a tough lefty, he can play. And then obviously, like you said, he can platoon with Vogelback a bit. But I see Alvarez, if he hits in spring training, as being the short side platoon with Narvaez. And also, but Narvaez is never, he will break down or not play as well if he goes over, 350, 400 plate appearances. So I think between being the short side platoon for Narvaez, getting some DH at bats, and Ruff being able to play some outfield as well, I think Alvarez will, as long as he performs, does have the opportunity to be a fantasy asset at catcher. Uh, their backup at catcher is Tomas Nido, and as we know, Tomas Nido is not a very good hitter. Um, Pitching wise, what I found kind of interesting, this is a little off topic, but uh, at first glance, you see them sign Robertson and trade for Rayleigh, and you think, okay, those are their setup guys. But then they re-signed Ottavino as well. And what's interesting is we both know that Ottavino is basically unhittable against right-handed hitters, but gets hit pretty hard by lefties because he's got so much horizontal movement on his slider. But then Robertson is a right-hander who pitches better against lefties because of his cutter. So they're building the bullpen in a very kind of obvious, smart but obvious sort of way, right? We know Rayleigh was incredibly effective, and they have depth, right? Hernandez and Peterson
Yeah.
are both big league starter. Well, Hernandez debatable; he's better as a swing guy, but Peterson could be someone's number four, like a pretty decent number four. He had periods of pitching really really well last year. So no, I love what they've done. I think Beatty gets traded and probably pretty quickly. I would do that if I was them. Um, the lineup I think is a little deeper than what you see. Vogelbach is a high OBP. He doesn't hit from as much power as people think, but he's a high OBP guy. So is Marcana. Marte provides value in a number of different ways. I think we could see his steals potentially tick up a little just because of some of the changes. So if Narvaez or Alvarez is your number 9 hitter, that's a pretty deep lineup. I don't know that I like McNeil at number 5, and I don't know if they'll keep him
Yeah,
either.
I don't either. I
I
think
think
that's
he,
probably why I soured on it heading down. And I saw, Canha and Vogelbach and
right.
Narvaez is coming off a rough year. And it's just, but yeah, I mean, if Alvarez hits and then Marte still, has another strong season, who plays center? If you said if Nimmo
Nimmo.
needs a day off,
They
and
probably try
the
to get away with Marte in center.
Marte in center.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
His instincts aren't great, but he's still fast enough to be able to track some stuff down. But yeah, I think they're what I know is they're a hell of a lot better than they were last year, and they were a good team last year. So it'll be fascinating to see. One other note on them is just that their top 2 pitchers are basically 39 and 40 years old. Well, 38 and 39 right now, but Verlander will turn 40. So they've got to have the Petersons and the Eliezer Hernandezes to be able to pitch when those guys get hurt, because I think it's not an
Yeah.
if, it's a
And
when.
then Tyler McGill as well.
Right, and Joey Lucchesi. So
No,
nice depth.
no.
No, well, Lucchesi's like he's a 4.5 ERA left-handed starter that you pitch for 5 innings potentially, right?
Okay. I'm gonna
Until he
hold my
get until he gets exposed. That's what I see. I don't love him either, but you have to have those depth pieces, I think. All right, one more Mets thing, and then we'll move on to the next. Edwin Diaz they re-signed him to a 5-year, $102 million contract. Not going to debate the contract as much as, and we know Diaz was probably the most dominant reliever last year in baseball, numbers wise. The question for you is, at what point is any reliever contract um, too long and too much money, right? What's a reliever worth to you if you were running the Mets?
Well, I think if I'm running the Mets, I don't really have a budget, so I can do whatever I want. Um,
So, what's the value in signing him to an extension like this, if that's the case?
well, I think, we've documented pretty well about how relievers are such a volatile position. And I don't even think being an elite reliever makes you, um, excludes you from that. So, if they get 2 to 3, maybe really good years out of the 5, you probably have to say that's a win. Um, because the thing that I value about him is he will pitch beyond the ninth. He can get, he's gotten 2 inning saves. He'll come in the eighth. He'll go back out doing up and down. So I do think that increases his value a little bit. A lot of the guys when they get to that level, they become exclusively ninth inning.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think having a weapon like that at the end of the game to help close games out and get the 27 outs, I think is valuable. So, but yeah, I think from a value perspective, like I said, I think if you get 2.5 to 3 healthy, really good years, you can say it's a good investment.
Mm-hmm. His year in Seattle before he got traded to the Mets, he was a 3.5 win pitcher according to Fangraphs. This past year, he was a 3 win pitcher, and the previous year he was a 2 win pitcher. So if you're paying, 4 million per year, right? So 20.5 million essentially for a 3 win reliever, or even a 2.5 win reliever. I think it's a lot of money, but I can see why they did it. Um, he has had some ups and downs, and so I think that that's worth kind of looking at. The 2 years where he struggled, the first 2 years in New York when he struggled, he was he had a higher home run to fly ball percentage than the last 2 years. He also had an incredibly last year. He had a 67.8% left on base percentage. So some bad luck and some not clutch pitching. And then last year it was 90.4% left on base. So he really did change his ability to pitch and with some luck with runners on. But and then the first 2 years in New York, his BABIPs were 377 and 381. So one could make the case that there was some bad luck there. I don't know. For me, I don't. I honestly, I think the contract. This is going to sound silly, but I think the contract is like 60% performance and 40% marketing. By that, I think that everyone knows the song, his entrance song. Everyone
Right.
got so into it. It was like the thing on the internet for a good month and a half, right? This season. And if you take a player, and people were coming to the games for that particular experience, right? To
Right.
see his ninth inning intro. And those sorts, I don't know how much the teams make off of attendance. I assume it's a ton. And they
Yes.
probably sold a ton of Diaz jerseys because of that. Not that he wasn't a great pitcher already, but the marketing was ingenious, right? I think we all agree. So, what is that worth to the Mets in dollar value? And if they can continue that even for a year or two, um, maybe his contract pays for himself. They made the same argument with Ichiro at times with the Mariners, that Ichiro made the Mariners so much money because of his marketing to Japan and Asia that they could sign him to any contract they wanted, and it was still profitable for the organization.
Right.
So I do think with Diaz, there's an element of that as well, but it's not a horrible thing to have the most dominant reliever in 2022 at the end of the back end of your bullpen. So I get it. Uh, so we go from Edwin Diaz to Robert Suarez, who signed a 5 year, $46 million contract with the San Diego Padres. That's a lot of money for Robert Suarez. Was he on your radar much last year? And what do you think about them doing this?
He was on my radar. And I see this as sort of what Atlanta did last year with Iglesias, knowing that Jansen might leave. So I believe if it's not this year, it's next that Hader will be, be in his walk year. And so, I saw this as a bridge, an option for them if they don't extend Hader or if he leaves, they have kind of a closer in house.
Mhm.
And, um, I really like him as a pitcher. I was on him last year, was interested in him last year. Was I able to draft or acquire? But I think the way he finished the season, you can't underestimate the transition coming to the major leagues from pitching overseas and pitching wise. His stuff plus is really fantastic. And we talked about his pitch mix when we highlighted pitchers to watch. One of our episodes after the season, he really has a starter's arsenal in terms of the number of pitches he throws and things like that. So, um, yeah, I think to me he's a really quality pitcher, and he's a bigger guy, 6'2", 210. So um, I don't think the velocity gets is anything to be concerned about outside of any other concern you have for any pitcher that throws hard. So
Mhm.
it looked a lot richer to me earlier on in the offseason. It was one of the first people to sign. Seeing the money that's been spent since, it
Mhm.
looks pretty. It looks like a pretty decent signing. And again, I think they see him as a potential bridge after Hader, as an in-house option down the road. But in the meantime, he gives them, elite setup or fireman, however they choose to use him. Because I think at this point in his career, Hader prefers, to pitch the ninth.
Right. He's a fascinating reliever because his stuff is more vertical than horizontal. And so he was last year, he was 44% four seam, 21% change, 20% sinker. And then he threw 9% cutters. And it's so with that vertical movement as opposed to horizontal, his swinging strike rate was 11 point, hold on, get to 11.9, which is a little low as far as I'm concerned for a late reliever. I remember Doug Jones and Jeff Montgomery back in the day were relievers that induced contact, but that doesn't work so well anymore. The other thing is his 5 years takes him into his age 30, his age
Six.
36 or age 37 season.
Mm-hmm.
He's 31 years, 9 months right now. And then they've got 1 year of history on him as far as being a quality major league pitcher. So I do think it's a little bit of a risk. Um, if it was my team, the Mariners did this, I would much prefer them to try to develop uh, as they have some of those talented relievers, or even, really focus on some of the retreads and find 50 innings of quality like this. I don't think the Padres needed to sign him to this contract, but I think they were also throwing around money. And as far as slotting him, I do think you're right that they're trying to find options to let Hader go, because Hader is going to demand a top of the market type of contract. He's probably going to look for a contract similar to Diaz, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I would assume they see him as a 1 year thing right now, and then he'll leave. But I don't know. I think Suarez is a very effective pitcher. I don't, as far as building a bullpen goes and the amount of money they paid and his development and or age and history, I would probably have spent it elsewhere. Uh Next one, Clayton Kershaw, 1 year, 17 million, re-signed with the Dodgers. We all know who Clayton Kershaw is. Were you surprised at all by this?
No, not at all. Not at all. I think it was just a question of whether he wanted to pitch again. So, and yeah, I was not surprised at all.
He held up for 120, had 22 starts and 126 in the third innings last year. And his ERA, his xERA, his FIP, and his xFIP are all under 3. Pretty amazing guy, pretty amazing
Yep.
pitcher. And fits right in with the current day starters, which is you're going to get hurt. You're probably not going to throw 30, start 36 games, but still effective nevertheless. Uh, how long do you think he pitches?
It's, say another season or two. I think he really wants to win another ring. Um, I really think if they're able to win another World Series in the next year to three,
He'll go
that
out.
would be it. That
Mhm.
would be the thing that sends him off. He has the 1 in 20, but I really think he wants another one.
I agree.
Just I think that's why he's playing at this point. Um, and he's is on the team that knows him and he knows them, and
Hmm.
so I think there's real comfort there. I think it's interesting from a fantasy perspective, you know, from a keeper perspective or even a redraft, how we value him. I think you and I um, had differing opinions of how to value him going into the season. And I think, as we face the decision of going into draft season, on a per inning basis, he's really going to help you, but you also know you're not going to get volume. So as a GM, as a fantasy team constructing a pitching staff, how do you want to value those innings? Um, and taking him, do you make other decisions? Does that color your other decisions in terms of trying to find more innings? But at the same time, again, I think as you noted, his ratios last year, his stuff, his location plus all are still really, really good. And he pitches on a really good team. So all the other elements are there when he pitches. So I think it's just a fascinating um, situation to manage around.
Will you value him highly or target him um, heading into next year, regardless of format?
I personally would, but because I love really good pitchers. But he wouldn't be one of
Who
my first
doesn't,
five or
Aaron?
six. What's that?
I said, who doesn't?
Yeah.
I'm teasing, but like, I guess
Well, I don't know. Some of the guys we play with, I don't think they really care much about pitching,
that's
but
true. That's
I
true.
not to throw any shade, because we all play how you want, right? And
Right.
I love building pitching staffs. It's probably my favorite thing about fantasy, other than the social element and just being engaged with baseball. So
Right. Totally. I
I've never
agree.
had I never had a chance to roster him. So, I'm hopeful at some point I'll be able to nab him.
I think that would be, he's one of those two that you bring this up for me that he is a joy to watch pitch, right? He's an artist in a lot of ways, and he's got a unique delivery, and his curveball is insane. And I think that having player, I tend to gravitate if it's one versus another. I'll gravitate towards the player I want to watch and follow, and
Yeah.
Kershaw is one of
Yeah.
those. The Dodgers are fun to watch. Games in Dodger Stadium on TV look phenomenal. Like there's all those elements as well. But he is, yeah, I think he's gone from being an ace on a fantasy team to, you know, you have a championship rotation if he's your number 3 or 4, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that to me is how I look at him. Unfortunately, especially in our league where there's a number of players in California, a number of managers in California, I think that Kershaw's draft position or value in our home league is slightly elevated compared to his actual value or where I would consider picking him. So I just assume I won't roster him because of some of the people that are in LA in our league or our Dodgers fans.
Fair
And
enough.
I do think that comes into play, and I think it's something to consider in all fantasy leagues. If you're playing, especially if you're playing with friends, is people's regional biases will impact their perspective on drafts, right? I
Mm-hmm.
I wholeheartedly admit that I have a lot of Mariners on my team. Part of it might be because I study those players more than any other players, but part of it is that I also want to root for Mariners, right?
Right.
Like I said, Kershaw I think is probably slightly overvalued in our league, but I would bet you that like Yankees and Mets and Red Sox and Phillies and some of the other East Coast teams, people value those players a little less in our league because we're a West Coast league. All
Good
right.
point.
Rafael Montero re-signed with the Astros, 3 years, $34.5 million. This signing was done while the Astros did not have a GM in place. Um, James Click had basically stepped down because of the lowball offer from the owner, and everyone kind of assumes that this was the owner doing business and re-signing Montero because he's not necessarily worth 3 years, 34.5 million. What I will say in his defense is he did pitch 68 and a third innings. Um, with a 2.37 ERA, and that those are many more innings than Suarez, and I believe it's more innings than Diaz as well last year. What say you about Rafael Montero re-signing with the Houston Astros?
Yeah, I mean, you can put me in the Suarez camp in terms of how you viewed the investment in Suarez
Mm-hmm.
for Montero. I I think fantasy wise, him staying in Houston to me makes him rosterable, although I think his value will be inflated after the year he had.
Mm-hmm.
But the way they're using him is change up against left-handed hitters. They were a right-handed only bullpen, and he was really their guy who could get left-handers out.
Mm-hmm.
But his stuff plus is only 94. For a reliever that is quite low. Um, he doesn't have any pitch that he gets a 40% whiff rate on. Um, he does have four pitches he throws at least 10% of the time. Again, that changeup featuring heavy against lefties. So um, I would look for a repeat of what he did. I didn't think that it was a good savvy deciding from a baseball perspective, but I think from a fantasy perspective, knowing Houston's baseball IQ, especially around pitching,
Mm-hmm.
and their ability to figure out what guys are good at and when to use them, what matchups they can excel in. I think a pitcher like Montero is a good exhibit A of what that can do for a pitcher's value.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think again from a pure stuff movement talent perspective, I think he's kind of middle road, maybe above average. But he certainly pitched better than that last year.
Right. So Montero had 23 holds last year. We play in a holds league. I think that is certainly a value. He's on a team that's probably going to win 90 to 100 games. So there's going to be hold and save opportunities on that team. I think that's important. I think your point about Houston being willing to re-sign him, you've kind of follow those teams that are smart, and if they're willing to sign him to that contract, they know that he's good. So that's worth something in my mind. Let me
Yeah.
ask you this. I know we pull the stuff plus and the pitching plus numbers from a lot of Saris's work. What is what does stuff plus mean to you as a fantasy guy as far as what statistics that impacts?
Yeah. So I relate stuff to swing and miss. So strikeouts and things like that.
Right.
Because it's stuff is it's velocity and movement.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so yeah, especially for a reliever, swing and miss, I think is an important part
Sure.
of their skill set. So I look at stuff and in the context of their arsenal, and the swinging strike rates and things like that to try to better understand, what is their true talent and like
Right.
how are they getting outs? Is it sustainable, um, and things like that? Because I think the power of those skills metrics or skills measurements in terms of shapes of pitches is there oftentimes can be more predictive of a skill change or an opportunity than ratio stats will be,
Right.
which require a lot more um,
Data.
sample size
Mm-hmm.
to become real, to become actionable, right? Um, and so that's how I use Stuff Plus.
I think I guess I would love to know more about, and I know he won't share how he comes up with that number. For me, stuff plus, as you said, equates for the most part to swing and miss or swinging strike percentage. I think there is an element of, you could have like Alcantara be a good example, who his swinging strike rate may be slightly lower than some of the other elite hitters, but he's trying to induce contact. And because his stuff is so great, he's able to induce weak contact or ground balls. And I would assume Stuff Plus also takes that into account. So it's a number with a little bit more depth than just simple swinging strike. While you were answering, I checked. So Montero's swinging strike rate last year was 11.4, and Suarez was 11.9. But Suarez had a much higher Stuff Plus number, right?
Right.
So I wonder what the differentiation is between those two pitchers that created a much higher Stuff Plus number for Suarez. All
Right.
right.
And so, yeah, to just use that as an example, I think so. What that would tell me as a fantasy owner is that if I saw that, I might think there might be more ceiling or there might be more potential for K rate or for Suarez,
Right.
it doesn't mean that necessarily, but if I might make me look closer
Sure.
and say, is there more room there for him to get more strikeouts?
That's a great point.
Montero was kind of, yeah. So to your point about his swinging strike rate, I mean, Suarez and Montero are both about a strikeout per inning pitcher. But yeah, there's that might be an indication that there's some room to grow there potentially with Suarez.
Mm-hmm. Next, Tyler Anderson to the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, 3 years, $39 million. I think you're qualified to speak on Tyler Anderson here.
Yeah, I mean, this one is a painful one for me because it's a big arrow down. He was a big part of both the teams I was heavily invested in last year, our TGFBI team, as well as our keeper league team. I had him in both leagues. I do watch a lot of Dodgers, and just seeing him kind of evolve into really having a career year couldn't be more uh, down on where he's going. I mean, he's obviously not going to forget everything that the Dodgers taught him in terms of his changeup and his pitch usage. However, you mix in the team context, the infield defense, the defensive rule adjustments. He's a location first pitcher, relies on weak contact. So a lesser defense behind him, a probably lesser well-positioned defense behind him coming off a career year. I really worry about him taking a pretty big step back, but I think you can rely on him for innings and things like staying in the game. But I hope he proves me wrong, honestly, because I loved watching him succeed last year. We were just talking about stuff plus. His stuff plus is 89.5, so well below average. But he does have that one out pitch, that changeup that's really good. His location plus is 104.3. Yeah, that's really his carrying card, right? Is his ability to locate and just pitch. He's a pitcher. So, but yeah, unfortunately, I don't think fantasy wise he'll be much of an asset this year.
I just at quick glance, I took a quick glance at some of his stats last year and metrics. Um, I wonder if he was the same pitcher in 22 as he was in 21, or very similar one with an obvious kind of uptick in ability to suppress walks. Um, but I wonder if the truth is somewhere in the middle, and he's actually like a low threes ERA pitcher this season, and that we're kind of underrating him. Because what I see is he struck out uh, slightly more batters last year. So he went from 19.1 K percent in 21 to 19.5 in 22. His walk rate went from 5.4% to 4.8% last year. So obviously those two things are positives, but they're not big adjustments, right? Um,
Right.
and then ran a lower BABIP last year at 256. 21 it was 284. And then his home run to fly ball rate he reduced by in half last year. So is that skill? Is that luck? Is it park? Is it organization? I think the argument could be that it's a little bit of all of them. Um, uh, Anaheim is not necessarily a hitter's park, right? Like I do
No.
think that he's going to have, if they decide to actually play Trout in the right outfield position, and he's not in center, I think that he can have a decent outfield. Though I guess they have Renfroe too, so Renfroe doesn't have much range either. But I don't know. I still value Tyler Anderson. I don't think that he's much of a different pitcher. He improved his location a bit, as you said. Uh, the question can be, is that organization or is that him? His swinging strike rate has increased over the last 3 years, but it didn't increase much from 21 to 22. It went from 11.5 to 11.8. We know
Yeah.
strikeouts isn't necessarily his whole game, but again, to me, I do still see a back end of a fantasy rotation starter
Yeah.
with a little bit less win potential, but I still like his skills. And I think that you can get him at a very good price in redraft because people are going to kind of, I guess, toss him in the garbage because of the organizational change. It'll be interesting to see though. I'd see.
Yeah, he's a skilled pitcher without a doubt. I hope he has a structure around him to support his success because he definitely is a skilled pitcher, no doubt about it.
Right on. Do you have anything on Clevenger going to the White Sox? 1 year, 8 million.
I don't. I mean, I think it's a prove it contract, and for him trying to reestablish himself, his swinging strike rates really plummeted last year. Um, and I think it's really hard to be successful when you don't have great command and you don't have much swing and miss. So
Right.
that was what led me to move away from him, was the lack of swing and miss, and to me that concern is still there.
Mm-hmm.
And going to that park doesn't do anything to alleviate that, and just gonna have to see him another year removed from all those major surgeries to see if he can kind of refine it again. He's got a deep arsenal, I'll say that for him. But yeah, he just has to get some of this swing and miss back, I think, for me to be interested fantasy wise.
His fastball average fastball velocity is down 2 miles an hour over his career year in 2019, and his swinging strike rate is down almost. It's four about a little over 4.5% from 15.2 and 19 to 10.6. So your point is well taken. I think he's. I don't know. I think he's just kind of a bulk pitcher for the White Sox at this point in time. You're not hoping to get 2019 back. But their pitching coach is a very good pitching coach. And I think that
Yeah.
he had to have seen something for them to sign him. So fantasy wise, he's a wait and see for me. I don't think I'm really into rostering him, at least at the beginning of the year. Uh, so let's go through the big ones. Maybe we'll skip over some of the smaller signings here. For the sake of time, Jacob deGrom, 5 years, $185 million to the Texas Rangers. That's the biggie. What do you think?
Another pitcher I've never had a chance to roster in fantasy. Um, yeah, I mean, I would say I was stunned. I mean, I saw that the Rangers were supposedly interested. I didn't necessarily take that seriously. Um, yeah, he got the years that he was looking, found someone to give him the years, and I think he's in. We talked about Kershaw on a per inning value. Um, he's shown to be when he's on the mound, he is exceptional, an exceptional fantasy asset. But at the same time, I think the Rangers are trying to establish themselves as a really competitive team, and I question how much he can be the centerpiece of that, because how often is he going to be available?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I like him more from a fantasy perspective than I do from a real worship perspective, just because his availability. But again, when fantasy wise, when he is available, if he's not out for the year, when he does pitch, he's going to be exceptional.
How do you value him, say, versus Kershaw in
I
fantasy?
would value, I would value him a little bit more highly,
Mm-hmm.
because I think, um, yeah, he's at a different point in his career. And I think innings wise, they might end up very similar, but I think the production you would get per inning would be higher, have a higher fantasy impact from Jacob
So,
DeGrom.
a couple of thoughts on DeGrom for me. Do you think that now that he has the security of a 5 year contract, there's the potential for him to dial down his velocity a little bit and his effort, because he's not trying to impress in the same way because he has contract security? That's one question. I think that there is that potential. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Two, what I find really interesting is so his innings pitched from 14 through 19 were 140, 191, 148, 201, 217, 204. Okay. The last 3 years, granted, there's COVID, were 68, 92, and 64.1. So he has not pitched above 92 innings in the last 3 years, whereas his first 6 years, he didn't pitch under 140.1 innings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I go scroll down and I look at average fastball velocity, his velocity jump coincides completely with his reduction of innings. So average fastball and starting in 14 was 93.5, 95, 93.4, 95.2, 96, 96.9. Those were all the years that he pitched 140 or more innings. Then those last 3 years where he didn't pitch more than 92 innings, 98.6, 99.3, 98.9. So just looking at those numbers, not looking at, the slider was certainly a 92 mile an hour pitch, not even looking at anything other than fastball velocity, average fastball velocity versus innings pitched year to year. When he sat 95, 96, he threw 140 plus innings. And he was still a very, very effective pitcher. When he throws 98, 99, he throws 90 innings or 60 innings, right?
Right.
He's also getting older and had more injuries. So for me, if I'm Texas, I'm saying I rather have 100 innings of Jacob DeGrom at, whatever it was, a .7 whip or something like crazy like that, or do I want more bulk from him and put a premium on having him try to stay healthy? I think I'd rather have him stay healthy. But I find that correlation interesting between his velocity jump and his injury. It's a really rudimentary, like easy connection to make, but it was like spot on that his big increase in velocity coincided with his beginnings of not being able to pitch more than 100 innings per year.
No, it's fascinating. I love that you detailed that, and I think you know mentally what's going on there. I mean, I've heard him say he's not trying to start to throw harder. It's just he's working on his mechanics or whatever, and trying to get better and stronger, and the velocity has come with that.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, the correlation seems to be 1 to 1. And his pitch mix is not deep. I mean, there are games where he doesn't throw an off speed until the third or fourth inning. He'll
Right.
just keep throwing fastballs.
I wonder too if I don't know what his time between pitches is, but we know that because there's going to be a pitch clock next year, we're going to see we probably will see some reduction in velocity overall. Uh, so I wonder if that for a pitcher like DeGrom, I wonder if that uh, speeding him up a bit will force him to dial it back a little bit, which could be help him be healthier. I don't know, but it is something to think about. He's also moving. Texas is a pretty pitcher friendly park in the same way that the City Field is. Uh, I don't like seeing him go to. I got scared because the Texas is in Seattle's division, but it'll be fun to watch DeGrom pitch. Uh, enough on DeGrom.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is I pulled up. I was following along. We were detailing his innings. It's
Mm-hmm.
interesting that he had those three from 17, 18, 19. He had over 200 innings this season,
Mm-hmm.
and then he went to 20, and it was the shortened season, so no one pitched to volume.
Right.
And I really wonder, again, along with that velocity, is there a correlation between, is there a lingering effect, of stepping down, not doing that work, and then coming back in 21, getting hurt?
Sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And then also, I think with him, you have to remember that he was a shortstop. He didn't. He's late to pitching. So
Mm-hmm.
while he is 34, pitching wise, he's more like 30, 31
Mm-hmm.
comparatively to his peers. But fascinating guy and fun to watch.
Mm-hmm. He is. Justin Verlander to the Mets, 2 years, 86 million. First reaction to that signing.
It makes a ton of sense for what the Mets are doing, and I think for him as well, going to a compete now team. I think he was pretty vocal that the owner, and what he's trying to do, and the win now approach really resonated with him,
Mm-hmm.
and he was going to go somewhere where he could get a couple years at a really high rate, and he's going to have a chance to compete for a World Series. So I think it checked all the boxes for him. Fantasy wise, it's another great park, another really good team, similar to what he's been in the last couple of years. So, yeah.
Do you have any concern about his declining swinging strike rate or that he's going to be on the decline as a pitcher at all?
I don't. Yeah, I think if you were expecting the strikeouts to come back, I think you're probably wish casting there. But I think the other elements of fantasy, I think I don't fear necessarily a step back there because I haven't seen anything other than maybe it's a little bit fortunate on some like left on base percentage and things like that and home
Mhm.
run rates. Maybe a little bit of good fortune. Outside of that, I don't see indicators that anything he did last year was not sustainable.
Mhm. I agree. Yeah, his left on base. It's funny you have to scroll like you can't actually get the top label of what the column is because he's had such a long career that you have to look at the number and guess. He had an 80.5% strand rate last year, which is slightly above league average, but he's ran higher strand rates in 18 and 19 than league average as well. So I would say that in some ways that's a skill. He's also ran really low BABIPs historically. Um, and so his 240 BABIP isn't necessarily an anomaly. Uh,
Mm.
he's not a 175 pitcher. For me, he's getting old enough that I don't know that you can year to year count on him doing the same thing. I think the contract was smart. I do worry a little bit about the declining swinging strike rate, and given the fact that he's going to be 40 heading into this year, it's just something to keep an eye on. But still, yeah, Justin Verlander is still a great pitcher. I don't know if I consider him an ace, even though he won the Cy Young, but he is a great pitcher nevertheless. We'll skip Andrew Haney and Taiwan Walker and Jamison Tyon and Jose Quintana. I think they're all, for the most part, smart signings. But if they are going to be rostered in your fantasy league, it's probably going to be as a uh, kind of a back end starter. Heaney, you're looking for strikeouts with Texas, kind of lightning in a bottle. Taiwan Walker, I think, is a mid threes, high threes ERA pitcher going to a tough park in Philly. Tyone to the Mets, or I mean to the Cubs, doesn't do a whole lot for me. Again, he's kind of back of the rotation. Quintana to the Mets, same thing. He's going to be their number five. Uh, Kenley Jansen to Boston, 2 years, 32 million. From a baseball perspective, it was strange. From a fantasy perspective, what do you think?
I'm gonna roll it back 1 second. So just from that last group of four,
Yeah.
I want you to tell me one guy that you would absolutely stay away from, and then one guy that you might take a flyer on from that group. And you can tell me why or not if you want, but just real quick. I'm just curious.
Um, I think Taiwan Walker in Philly is probably a stay away for me, in part just because of the park and the defense. He's not a high strikeout guy, right? He's become a very much a pitch to contact guy on a team with a bunch of sluggers and in a small park. To me, that's not a very good fit from a fantasy perspective for him. I love him. I loved him as a prospect with the Mariners, but that would be my stay away. And then Andrew Haney going to Texas, big park, super high strikeout pitcher. Has had health problems, has some control problems, but I think he has the highest upside of the four. Tyone and Quintana are just kind of boring for me. I think Quintana was a smart signing by the Mets, but fantasy wise, I don't know what he's going to really do. He might be good, but it's going to be you'll get lucky if you expect it if you picked him and he's good for you. And then Tyone, I know Tyone has shown some signs of getting closer to the prospect that he was with the Pirates. But what's his upside, right? His upside is 150, 160 strikeouts and 11 wins on a shitty Cubs team. So he's not going to be a priority for me. So I would say highest upside would be Haney. Stay away would be Taiwan.
Fair enough.
What about you?
I would go in opposite direction from you. I think if there was one guy who I'd be seeing here, it'd be Quintana,
Uh-huh.
as one of my last pitchers. And the guy I would stay away from would be Tyon,
Mm-hmm.
just because I don't have any feel for him or the Cubs. And I feel like the other two, I know Heaney and Walker, while I'm more neutral on him, I have a better feel for what I'm getting. I really don't with Tyon. So
Right.
he would be my stay away. And I don't really know what the Cubs are doing.
I don't know if the Cubs know what the Cubs are doing, right?
Yeah.
Uh
So Kenley Jansen,
yes.
I think fantasy wise, I mean, we can argue about Boston's direction and things like that, but the reality is even the poorest teams win 65 to 70 games.
Mm-hmm.
most teams have a save rate of 35 to 45%. So do the math there. There's saves to be had even on a poor team. Um, and I think the advantage with Kinley is his role, in 2023 with bullpen fluidity and firemen and leverage situations and all the work that we do to identify pitchers who get opportunities and get saves and holds. What Kinley's role is. He's going to come in a ninth of the lead. Um, his stuff plus last year was still really good. So while he is aging, and while he probably will have a couple phantom IL stints to keep him fresh in the summer, I think when he pitches, he's going to pitch in the ninth, and he still has enough skill where I don't think I do not put him in the Melanson category yet, where he's saves with your eyes closed. I don't
Right.
think he's there yet.
Right.
Um, I think he is of that type of player, but still with substantial skills.
Mhm.
So I think he might be someone who's a little undervalued, just because people are trashing on the Red Sox and because of his age. But I see someone that still has a 120 stuff plus, and it has role clarity
Sure.
and a track record. So I think he might be a little undervalued with those market dynamics going on.
I think the role clarity point is the most important one for me with him. It's a good point that Kenley Jansen is just a closer, right? You're not signing him to that contract to make him an eighth inning guy. So there's that. I think that's set in stone. He had, I believe, 38 saves 2 years ago and 41 saves last year, if I'm not mistaken. Um, so super valuable. Agreed. I think there were three numbers that I just found that concerned me a ton. His swinging strike rate from, let's see, I like to do this. I'm just going to read it from 2010 when he was a rookie.
Okay.
14-4, 16-3, 14-4, 14-7, 16-7, 16-6, 17-1, 18-2, 13-4, 15-7, 15-15, and last year it was 11-4. So his swinging strike rate fell off a cliff after 11 years of um, and anything between 13-4 and 18-2, right? So swinging strike rate way down. Was it a intentional shift on the part of Atlanta to have him pitch to contact more, maybe to conserve him a little bit? I don't know, but that drop concerns me. The other two numbers that are concerning to me are his his O contact went from 48 or 45.8% in 21 to 63.8% in 22. So the ability of the hitter to make contact with pitches outside of the zone increased by 18%, right? So
Right.
maybe the deception or the movement on his pitches where he used to induce all of that swing and miss kind of went away. You see that in the swing and miss number. The other one is the contact percent against Kenley went from 69.2% in 21 to 76.9% in 22. 76.9% was higher than any other year in his career. So these numbers to me are indicative potentially of the beginnings of a decline as far as his raw skills go. Um, Hitters probably feel a little more comfortable in the box against him than they used to. Will he still accumulate saves? Absolutely, but I don't know that the dominance will be there anymore. He is a bit more of an accumulator to me at this point in time than he is the dominant Kenley Jansen that we knew in his prime. So to me, those were numbers that I glance at to see, where are there big shifts here that we can anticipate him not being the same pitcher that he was in the past. But I still think you can mark him down for 35 saves as long as he's healthy in Boston. He just might explode a little bit more.
Yeah.
Anything on else on him for you?
No, their bullpen is getting really interesting. Too bad they don't have much of a starting rotation.
Well, they're moving Whitlock to the rotation, right?
Yes, they are.
So you're looking at shoot. I don't have roster resource pulled up right here.
I mean, it's Sale, it's Pavetta, it's now Whitlock, potentially Hauk. I'm not. Is it Hook or Hauk?
Hauk.
Hauk. Potentially Hauk. Yeah. So they're
I think he's bullpen for sure.
Yeah.
Um, Houck
I know
is
that that's part of the reason why they were bringing in so many bullpen arms is to give at least them the option to look at him there.
right. So they also
Yeah,
signed. I think they signed Chris Martin too to a free agent deal.
they did. They signed Martin. They signed Jolie Rodriguez as well.
They still have Cutter Crawford, who has great stuff. John Schreiber, who was an incredibly effective reliever last year. Their bullpen actually looks very good.
Yeah,
The only question
it's
mark I
intriguing.
see is, well, they've got the problem is the last three, the number 3, 4, and 5 starters are penciled in as Whitlock, James Paxton, and Bayo. And Whitlock will be transitioning. Is always hurt, and Bayo is I would say second tier, still a very good but second tier starting prospect. So they've got a lot of question marks in that rotation. I don't know. I put
They signed another lefty that's not on this list. I can see us I'll have to look it up, but anyway, it's not on this list, but
oh,
they signed another lefty.
besides Hoeli,
What's that?
besides Rodriguez,
Yes.
their offense
Yeah.
is just bad.
Yeah.
Uh, so we've got, let's go through the last four quickly here if we can. Kodai Senga to the Mets, 5 years, 75 million. You have any thoughts on Senga?
Matt Strom was a pitcher I couldn't think of that they signed.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so no, actually he went to Philly.
Oh, he
Never
did.
mind. Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought he went to Boston. Yeah, so
Another red team.
Singa, interesting. I think interesting transition. Um, the thing that gives me pause is his walk rate. Is his career walk rate, and the NPB was 3.5 or 3.4 walks per nine. Um, the thing that would get me excited is his uh, three pitches potentially that are plus the four seam, the split, and then that crazy ghost forkball that he throws. So, if he can command the fastball and get ahead, get strike one, I think he has potentially the out pitches to get guys out. My concern would be, especially in year one, harnessing that command,
Mm-hmm.
getting ahead, working ahead. Certainly great team context, uh, very talented. I would love to have him as someone I'm not relying on. Maybe try to hit a jackpot. Draft him as a 5 or 6, and have a number 3 because I think he has potentially the ceiling to do that even in 23 as he gets acclimated. But I fear that he will go as a 3 or 4, and I would be reticent to pay that just in case the adjustment
Right.
is too steep and he can't have that command in his first year.
Right. He's one of those players that is really fun to roster because you don't know who he is or you don't know what he's capable of, and so it's a lottery ticket that we're all attracted to. Um, but the history of pitchers coming from Japan and having that kind of huge success is not incredibly high. I think so. For
Well,
me, probably going to be valued higher by other fantasy players than I would. Um, the contract is interesting to me because the contract is less than 75% of Edwin Diaz for the same years. And so the risk, I think, with Senga is pretty low, relatively speaking. And, still say he flames out for the Mets and is barely getting through 5 innings, pitching like 4.5 ERA ball. You move him back in the rotation. Carrasco can still be a 3. Quintana can still be a 4, right? Though I think those back 3 are pretty fluid. And then, as we spoke of before, you still have Peterson and Eliezer Hernandez. So if Senga is just say he's a fastball forkball guy, and that's it, and he's not Kevin Gosman, he can still be a dominant 8th inning reliever. And if he just focused on those 2 pitches, and you're paying him, I know Diaz's contract was pretty ludicrous, but I don't think that it was that much of a risk for the Mets to sign him because he can pitch in a different role. So he's going to be interesting to me. I think there is a lot of pressure in New York. I think that's real. Um, I will keep an eye on him, but he obviously won't be on our waiver wire. So it's probably a pitcher that I won't be rostering. Quickly, Zach Eflin to the Rays, 3 years, 39 million.
Man, I had this whole speech prepared today about how I was going to talk a lot about team context and how I think that's important,
Sure.
but that you would check me on it because I would talk about it too much. And I don't think I've talked about it at all.
You
So
really haven't.
I'm gonna talk about it now.
Sure.
This is a guy who, because he's going to the Rays, it gets my attention. He has a deep arsenal. He is a location first pitcher. You can count the number of guys on less than two hands, 10, less than 10, who have better location plus than he had last year. They gave him the richest contract they've ever given a free agent, which, we'll leave that there. But yeah, I mean, he has six pitches. He commands almost all of them. I think Tampa has an idea maybe of how they're going to get maybe something a little bit more. His curveball did have a 43.5% whiff rate. So he has a potential swing and miss pitch there. I was wanting to see what his ground ball rate was, but I mean, I'm very, very interested in getting him at the end of my rotation because of, again, the location, I think gives him a floor. And then the team context, I think raises his ceiling a little bit.
Ground ball rate is mid 40s historically.
Okay.
He was able to suppress home runs quite a bit last year. 0.95 per 9 innings, 9.6% home run to fly ball ratio. He's run the last 3 years. His xFIP has been in the mid threes. His ERA has been right around 4. I think you're right. I'll push back on team concept just a little bit. I think that it's important to consider. I also think that sometimes it's easy for I'm certainly guilty of this, to say anyone that the Astros, the Rays, the Dodgers, the Brewers, the Guardians acquire as pitchers, they're going to be great, right?
Right.
And the number of failures, or like a Jimmy Nelson, right, with the Dodgers, or there's tons and tons of pitchers who they do sign or they do acquire who don't actually end up succeeding. But I think your point is well taken. The fact that they were willing to spend $13 million a year on Eflin means they have identified something very specific and believe that they can turn him into a very, very good starter. He also, the other thing with him is he will, if he throws, if you have a starter that you think is going to throw 150, 160 innings, it gives you the opportunity to bring up a Taj Bradley later, right? If you don't sign Eflin, Bradley's probably going to put more mileage on his arm. So I think there's some of that as well. But Eflin as a fantasy player, yeah, I think there'll be a race to see who's willing to actually invest a little bit higher in him than we have historically. I don't know if I'll be in that race, but I do think he's an effective pitcher for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, what I tell myself is that the team context needs to be a tiebreaker. You got to look at the skills first and not run away with the romanticism of where they landed. I think another interesting thing looking at Eflin is he's a pitcher who has consistently his xERA, which I'm trying to wean myself off of xAts. He's someone who's consistently outpitched it. And so again, and then he has 3 pitches that have a negative run value last year. And I think last thing, Tampa is a team that does value versatility in their pitchers. They took Springs and Rasmussen and turned them into starters. I think they could see them, to your point, go the other way with Eflin. They saw him be a really high leverage reliever in the playoffs last year. So they know he can handle the bullpen if they want to use him that way as well. So I think it's a good fit for them as a team that does like to use their pitching staff pretty malleably.
So on a fantasy staff in like a 15, 16 team league, where do you slot him next year if you had to predict? Like SP?
Where do I think he'll perform, or where would I think he'll be drafted?
Where do you think he'll perform?
I think he would be SP 5 or 6.
Okay. And where do you think he'll be drafted as?
I'm hoping like a 6 or 7, but I think probably like a 4.
Yeah. I don't think it's going to be even close to 6 or 7. I think 4 is probably the floor, to be honest with you. Um, because I think everybody does buy into the idea that Tampa can turn um what's chicken salad? What is it? Chicken shit into chicken salad, something like that. I don't know. Uh
I don't know if I've heard that one.
Two more starters, try to fly through it and maybe do some open form real quick. Chris Bassett to the Blue Jays, 3 years, 63 million. He is an Aaron Alvis special right there. Talk to me about Bassett.
Oh, another location first guy with a deep arsenal. Yeah, he's ran ERAs ranging from 2.29 up to the high of 3.81 the last 5 years. In Oakland and New York, I think he's going to more of a neutral environment on turf. I don't think that's great for him. I think less of the Blue Jays defense, even with Kiermaier in center,
Mm-hmm.
especially with an old Merrifield second and a mistake-prone Bichette short up the middle.
Mm-hmm.
All that said, similar to Tyler Anderson, I think Baskett is a really skilled pitcher. Someone again with great locations, so that raises his floor, on a winning team. So I think a slight arrow down for me, just giving another year's age and the context. But I think overall, still a really solid fantasy pitcher.
Would you rather Bassett or Eflin in fantasy next year?
Eflin, because I think the price will be lower.
I think that I would expect people to say Eflin, and I think the smart money would be Bassett because Bassett's boring, right? I think Bassett's boring. He's going to Toronto. Eflin is interesting because he's going to Tampa, but I think that Bassett will probably outperform Eflin if you had to force me to say one or the other. Last pitcher, we've got 2.5 minutes. We'll take a quick break and come back and finish up. Carlos Rodon to the New York Yankees, 6 years, $162 million for a 30-year-old injury-prone left-handed Carlos Rodon. What do you think?
Um, I love it for him. He's had a couple, you know, good in terms of healthy innings after, how not healthy innings, healthy years after a couple pretty rough ones. The White Sox basically let him walk over his health, um, if I'm remembering that correctly, or concerns about his health. So, um, he's someone with one of the best four seam fastballs in the major leagues in terms of swinging strike rate, run value. I love that. Someone leaves with the fastball, 61% usage, kind of an old school approach and arsenal. He's really assertive on the mound. I love watching him, really come to appreciate him. So, not super excited about him wearing pinstripes, but I do think the Yankees ballpark is a little bit overrated. People might overreact to him going there, but I think especially as a left-handed pitcher, he's going to be able to mitigate some of the left-handed power in that park. Um, and and they're a winning franchise, so good team context. I like the pitcher a lot. Again, I like the way he pitches. I'm happy for him. He's had a couple years of health, so he's had this opportunity to get this contract, and I'm a fan. Arrow up for me.
Yeah, I think he could win 20 games on that team. Um, Health is the only thing that really is a huge deal. I do wonder if they tinker with this. His slider's a great pitch. I wonder if there's such a slider heavy team. I wonder if they teach him if his slider is even more effective going to the Yankees. A pitcher I've loved for the last couple of years. I rostered him obviously last year, made him a priority. I hate that he went to the Yankees. Hate that. I had since traded him before he signed, so I'm glad that he didn't sign with a team that I love. Makes the trade a little more palatable for me. But congrats, he deserved it. He's worked really hard to get to that point, and we'll see what happens in Yankee Stadium. Let's take a quick break and open forum. Yes, mine is about spring training and our trip because it's on my mind. Is there a manager in our league who is the manager in our league that you are most excited to meet and why?
Wow.
It's a good
Put
one,
me on,
right?
you put me on the spot.
Heck yeah. Who comes to mind
Um,
when you're like, okay, I'm going to meet this person. I've never met them.
the first person I thought of was Kirk, but I've talked to him on like FaceTime.
Sure.
And then I thought of Doug and but I've talked to him on the pod,
Right.
so I got to see him. So it's like that face with the name kind of thing,
Sure.
as like was my first thought. I'll go with Brandon, because I've not had that sort of interaction with him.
Hmm.
And I feel like he and I have some similarities in
Hmm.
terms of our outlook, not just on baseball, on life.
Hmm.
I think um, a little bit more reflective, a little bit more internal, a little bit more processing. I've seen that side of him when we've talked about trades a lot of times. He's opened up to me and said, like, there are times where I say yes and I don't want to because I'm trying to please other people. And I
Sure.
think that kind of vulnerability and stuff like that, like I have that side to me, and I don't know that I get a lot of other interactions like that.
Sure.
And then I think from a management perspective, like he values a lot of the same players I do, so he really knows his stuff as well. And I don't have a face to go with those experiences, so I'll go with Brandon.
Okay. Awesome. Uh, I've met, I don't know, probably half of the guys in the league. So I'm excited. And I think those are the majority of the guys who are going to go. I'm sure there'll be a couple that I meet for the first time. Um, but I'll say that so Brandon is there was a period of time in Seattle where, he and I were incredibly close and our families were incredibly close. And I'll say that I'm really excited to hang out with Brandon. He's he was one of my best friends for a period of time. And you're spot on with like he is very introspective and reflective in that way. Uh, and then yeah, I just all of them. Kirk, I'm super pumped because such a good dude. Baggies I met when he came up to Seattle. I'm excited to see him. Doug, obviously. Uh, it's yeah, I just think it's going to be a blast. Like my time opening day last year with Fred meeting Freddie for the first time, that was a fucking riot. Like it's just I couldn't sleep last night because I was just thinking about the trip. It's going to be freaking amazing. Um, the other question I have for you, Aaron Horn too. Like that's my dog. He and I have spent a lot of time together. I haven't seen him in a minute, and I'm super pumped to see him. Uh, the other question I have is, would you prefer to have a draft where we sat at a table for a marathon day and just drafted in a circle, or a draft that was free flowing and it could be your pick and we could be sitting at a game in the sun and you just decide to text the group, I'm picking such and such, like a slower draft?
Wow. I guess I'd rather sit and like have a focus draft.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty selfish because I think that's where I'd be most comfortable preparing for my picks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that would be my answer
Okay.
because I think, I most of my picks are later and I won't really know who I will pick. It's going to be based on who's available. So, yeah, I would like to have resources and tools in front of me, and I would hate to miss out on games and stuff or have to make the choice between being prepared for my picks, knowing if I had picks coming up that day or that, and then also missing live games, which is a huge reason why we're going as well.
I love the idea of I love them both. Both are going to be a blast, but the idea of like, eight of us sitting on a bleacher watching a
Yeah.
game and Matt just saying to the group, you know what, I'm taking give me Jameson Tyon, right? And us having to record it. I think it'd be funny, and the timing of it would be really, really fun to have it be a slow draft in that way. But I also obviously I love the idea of having your computer and your charts and your drinks and your food and sitting down and just like a poker table style, just having an in-person draft in that way. So
Yeah, I
whichever way
think,
it is.
yeah, if you want to open it up like Friday night and start and then just keep it going. But I think there would have to be, I'd want to see a commitment if we're the last Sunday, we sit down and finish it kind of thing.
Right. If we're not finished by
If
Sunday,
we're not
I
finished.
understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it'll be fun. Like I said, I'm on a freaking high just thinking about it. It's going to be really amazing. And it's just coming from someone who's been to spring training a ton, right? I know what to expect as far as being in Arizona and going to games. And it really is as much as I love the other travels that I've had, I maybe just because I love baseball so much, it's the highlight of the year. It really is everything it's cracked up to be and more. I'm pumped.
Awesome.
All right, man. Well, let's start our positional rankings soon, potentially
Yeah.
next week. I'll send you a wireframe. We get started.
Okay.
Appreciate it,
All right.
brother.
Happy Christmas. Be
You too,
well. Enjoy your
man.
family.
Merry Christmas. You too.
Bye.
You too.